Welcome to the Marketing Behind Rapid Growth, the podcast where we explore the strategies, decisions, and growth engines behind some of the world's most successful technology companies. Today we're talking about Substack. Picture a small apartment in Kitchener, Ontario in 2017. A man named Chris Best is sitting at his desk, angry. Not angry at a person, angry at the internet itself. He starts typing. What comes out is a long, sprawling essay about everything broken in the media economy, the outrage, the algorithms, the way platforms seemed built to reward the worst version of human attention. He sends it to a friend, expecting a nod of agreement. Instead, he gets a challenge. His friend, the writer Hamish Mackenzie, reads it and says something blunt. This is boring. Everyone in media already knows the industry is dying. The real question is, what are you going to do about it? That single sentence changes everything. A complaint becomes a mission, and that mission becomes Substack. This is a story about what happens when a company refuses to separate its growth strategy from its values, and how that decision quietly became one of the most effective marketing engines in modern media. Let's get into it. Part 1. The bet nobody else was making. Chris Best didn't build Substack alone. He teamed up with Hamish Mackenzie and with a developer named Jairaj Sethi. Best and Sethi had both worked together before at the messaging app Kik. They weren't newcomers to building products. But this time, the ambition was different. They didn't want to build a better email tool. Plenty of those already existed. They wanted to rewrite the economic relationship between writers and readers entirely. So they ran a test. Not a survey. Not a focus group. A single real writer with a single real audience. They approached Bill Bishop, who wrote a China-focused newsletter called Cynicism, with about 30,000 readers. On October 18, 2017, Bishop told his audience he was putting his newsletter behind a paywall. Within a single day, it had generated 6 figures in revenue. That number mattered less as a milestone and more as a signal. It told Best something he couldn't have learned any other way. People don't pay for more email. Nobody wakes up wanting another newsletter in their inbox. But people will pay, quickly and without much persuasion, for a specific writer they already trust and care about. That distinction became the foundation of everything Substack built afterward. Part 2. Building a business that only wins when you win. To understand why Substack's model mattered, you have to understand the world it was entering. By the mid-2000s, most media companies had become dependent on 2 things: social platforms for distribution and advertising for revenue. That combination created a very specific kind of pressure. The web's economic infrastructure didn't reward depth or trust, it rewarded page views. And writers, much like the algorithms training them, were pushed toward clickbait, outrage, and cheap dopamine. The result was a barbell effect. On one end, huge audiences were being pulled into an endless low-value scroll. On the other end, there was a smaller but very real hunger for something slower. Long-form thinking, nuance, depth, and almost nobody was building for that second group. Substack's founders saw something else too. They saw that the entire industry's obsession with impressions and clicks was hiding fragility, not revealing strength. A business built on page views can look enormous and still be one algorithm update away from collapse. So they designed the opposite kind of business. No upfront costs for writers, no programmatic advertising, just a flat 10% cut of subscription revenue. That single design choice did something powerful. It meant Substack literally could not profit unless its writers profited first. Their incentives weren't just aligned on paper. They were structurally, financially locked together. Chris Best has described the early strategy as a sci-fi vision paired with a short-term plan. The sci-fi vision was enormous, nothing less than a cultural renaissance for writing. But the short-term plan was almost absurdly modest. Just make publishing a paid newsletter dead simple. No bloated 5-year roadmap, just the next concrete, high-impact step. Part 3. The vulnerability nobody wanted to admit. For all its early success, Substack had a structural weakness baked into its growth. In the early years, writers grew their subscriber base almost entirely by recruiting readers from other platforms: X, LinkedIn, Instagram. Which meant Substack, ironically, was downstream of the exact platforms it was trying to offer an alternative to. That's a fragile position. If those platforms decided to throttle Substack links, writers' livelihoods could take a hit overnight. That risk stopped being theoretical in 2023 when Twitter began restricting Substack links outright. It was a wake-up call, and Substack's response tells you a lot about how the company thinks strategically. Instead of trying to repair the relationship with the platforms it depended on, Substack made a costlier, more contested bet, become a destination in its own right. They built a native mobile app. They expanded into video, audio, and community features, things like chat and notes. The goal wasn't just diversification for its own sake. It was about turning a scattered collection of individual newsletters into something more coherent, an actual ecosystem with its own gravity that didn't need to borrow attention from anyone else. Part 4. When the product becomes the marketing department. Here's where the story gets most interesting from a growth perspective. Early on, Substack grew the way a lot of platforms grow, through high-touch recruiting. The team went after marquee writers with existing audiences, essentially importing readers from elsewhere. That works. But it doesn't scale forever. You can only personally recruit so many writers. The real unlock came when Substack stopped treating growth as something that happened around the product and started building it directly into the product itself. The feature that changed everything was called recommendations. Here's how it works. A writer can publicly endorse other publications on Substack. So when a reader subscribes to one newsletter, they're immediately shown curated suggestions for others, chosen by the writer they already trust, not by an anonymous algorithm. Think about what that does structurally. Every single writer on the platform effectively becomes a marketer for their peers. Instead of isolated newsletters competing for the same finite attention, you get a reciprocal loop. Writers pointing readers toward each other, each referral backed by earned trust rather than paid placement. By Substack's own account, this internal recommendation engine now drives a significant share of new subscriptions, a substantial portion of free signups, and a smaller but meaningful slice of paid ones too. That's the core insight worth sitting with. The best growth mechanism Substack ever built wasn't a marketing campaign. It was an architectural decision inside the product itself. Part 5. The strategic value of taking a side. Substack made another decision that looked risky on the surface, but turned out to be a form of positioning discipline. Most platforms try to please everyone. They moderate cautiously, avoid controversy, and aim for broad, inoffensive appeal. Substack went the other way. It took an expansive, permissive stance on speech, and it refused to demonetize writers just because of public pressure campaigns. This was genuinely controversial. It drew real criticism. It alienated some potential users entirely, but it also acted as a filter. The people who stayed weren't lukewarm users who might churn at the first inconvenience. They were believers, writers and readers who chose Substack specifically because of what it stood for. And believers, it turns out, make the loudest, most durable advocates. There's a phrase Chris Best has used that captures the logic well. You can't define success as no one ever being upset with you. A brand engineered to offend nobody usually ends up moving nobody either. That high-trust, lower-noise environment had a second-order effect nobody fully predicted. Consumer brands started noticing it. Companies like The Real, Hinge, and Tory Burch, all facing diminishing returns from programmatic advertising, began publishing their own editorial content directly on Substack. They weren't buying ad space to interrupt someone's feed. They were telling long-form stories to an audience that had opted in, on purpose, to engage with exactly that kind of content. In protecting the integrity of the relationship between writers and readers, Substack had, almost by accident, built a premium channel for brand storytelling. That wasn't the plan. It was a byproduct of doing the core thing well. Part 6. What this actually teaches us. Step back, and 5 strategic lessons emerge from Substack's growth story. First, unit economics outlast growth metrics. It's easy, especially with cheap capital available, to buy growth and mistake motion for real momentum. Substack tied its revenue to the actual lifetime value of a writer's subscriber base, not to impressions, not to clicks. That's a business built to survive, not just to look impressive on a slide. Second, pair a sci-fi vision with a short-term plan. Define the audacious, almost unreasonable end state, then execute the smallest concrete step toward it. Make paid email simple. Doesn't sound like a cultural renaissance, but it was the exact right first move to eventually get there. Third, turn the product into the marketing. The most durable growth often isn't sitting in the ad account. It's sitting in the architecture of the product itself. Recommendations worked because it aligned platform growth with something users already wanted: community and discovery, instead of bolting growth on top as an afterthought. Fourth, polarization can be positioning. A brand engineered to satisfy absolutely everyone tends to move no one. A clear stance on core values actually lowers acquisition costs over time because your most committed users end up doing your marketing for you, for free, out of genuine belief. Fifth, intention is the antidote to slop. As AI drives the cost of content towards zero, it doesn't invent low-quality content, it just scales whatever already exists, good or bad. In a feed increasingly full of frictionless generated text, real human intention, trusted curation, genuine depth, and actual voice becomes the premium good. That's arguably more true today than when Substack was founded. Conclusion. Substack's path, from one angry essay in an apartment in Kitchener to a platform hosting millions of paid subscriptions, is fundamentally a story about aligned incentives. The founders looked at a media economy built to serve advertisers, and they rebuilt it to serve writers and readers instead. By turning a niche publishing tool into an interconnected network, they insulated their creators from the whims of someone else's algorithm. By building marketing mechanics directly into the product, they turned a collection of isolated writers into a collective growth engine. The through line here is simple to state and genuinely hard to live by. When you only win if your users win, growth tends to follow. This was the marketing behind rapid growth. See you in the next episode.